Delta Squad forming up.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Legion Bros YouTube channel. Been a while since I posted on here. I wanted to get into some painting tutorials. I started painting Legion when it came out, and I've been kind of on and off again painting since then. I guess I started a little before Legion came out. Initially, I was actually at that first Gen Con when it was announced, which was pretty fun. I'd consider myself a intermediate, maybe below intermediate painter. But I just want to share some tips that I've learned over the past few years here of painting to help you get some really nice tabletop results quickly. Now for these commandos, I am doing a kind of Kashyyyk inspired dark green. I have a lot of white, like these guys, these white phase 2s. We paint a lot of white armor with the stormtroopers I have and clones. That I thought it'd be nice to try to break it up and try for a darker color scheme, kind of a Kashyyyk. So how it works is, they're already primed in black, and then I'm going to build up. My first layer is going to be this dark green. It's German camo dark green, and then next I'll build into black green, which is just slightly lighter. It's kind of hard to tell, but slightly lighter green, and then I'll finish with this uniform green. A few other things you're going to need. I think a wet palette is maybe not 100% necessary, but definitely super helpful in doing this. I'll talk a little bit more as I go on, but probably the worst thing that can happen with this, if you kind of do it wrong or don't use the right techniques, is you can get a really chalky finish and kind of like broken up, not smooth finish on your minis. So I do take several steps to be sure I'm using, a wet palette and using high quality paints and high quality medium, being sure that they're shaken enough, using good quality sponges so that you don't run into that problem. But it can happen. And one thing that really helps with that and keeping the paint from drying too quickly and then having a chalky finish is by using a wet palette. So yeah, mine's super simple, as you saw, just two like store-bought sponges and this little Pyrex thing here, and the water's filled up just a little bit below the sponges, and this will help keep the paint moist for quite a while I'm painting. Also got these nice little weights here that are pretty cool to help hold down the edges. Not necessary, but pretty neat. You also are going to need some kind of medium. I got this this weekend from Monument Hobbies over in Gen Con, which was really cool. Sold me this. I'm going to use it for a few things probably on these minis, but you can't just use this paint directly. I thin it with about 40% medium, about 60% paint, and mix it up on the wet palette here. This helps it not be as chalky too, and kind of smooths it out and gives me a nice smooth finish. This stuff is really nice. This is my first time using it, but really enjoyed it. I did it on a test model earlier, and it really helps make the paint nice and smooth. I put it into a little dropper bottle here just so it's a little easier to manage. And again, about 40% this and about 60% paint is what I've been doing. Now, the secret to this technique is using these makeup sponges, which I learned in that ProTech video. You want to be sure you get the right makeup sponges. These can be found at really any store. I think I got these ones at Walmart, and these ones, I think also at Walmart, but also Ulta has them, any beauty store. They're super cheap. You get a big pack of, 30 of them or 150 of them for just a few dollars. You do want to be a little careful in your selection when you're looking in the store. If you notice this makeup sponge right here, can kind of see all those little holes in the sponge. That's not really what we want. We want a more smooth surface, or else what can happen is we can get some texture on our flat armor panels when we're applying it to the clones. It doesn't necessarily look the best. So I found these were kind of I bought these a while ago in the store. Haven't really used them much just because of those holes. But if you can find, and you can just look in the store, notice how these are much smoother. Not so many of those holes all over the place. These little end parts are okay, where it's a little, kind of broken up in there, because we are going to use scissors to cut these into a nice edge. This one already has a nice edge, which is great. But yeah, you want a nice flat section like that will be best to apply the paint. And it's not super smooth on that seam there, so I still want it to be nice and wide on this edge, but I'm just going to grab here and then one nice clean cut. Going to cut down, and now we have a really nice smooth finish there. Don't be stingy with your sponges. You should swap them out pretty often. Even though I am using a wet palette, the paint still can dry decently quickly on the top of these sponges. Here's one I was using earlier, and after a little while, the paint sponges, it gets hard, it leaves kind of a little bit of a texture on there and can start to flake on the Mini and also start to give you not a smooth finish. So, okay, I'm gonna start with some paint here. Again, like I said, it'll be about 60% paint, about 40% of the medium here. I am also gonna work in pretty small quantities so that, yeah, again, like the paint on the wet palette can dry, so I'm gonna work in pretty small quantities so that I can just keep replacing it so that the paint stays fresh. So yeah, add a few drops there. There we go. I'm going to take just the end of a brush here and be sure that's mixed in well. Go, that's looking pretty good. Should also mention you will need a kind of paper towel. I prefer these blue ones because, like I was saying before, you really have to do, be careful not to leave any residue or any particles to get a smooth finish. So I use these blue ones because they don't leave behind a lot of lint like the classic white paper towels do. They're a little more expensive, but I really only use them for painting. So like $2 or $3 a roll, but it takes a long time to get through a roll. I'm gonna take my sponge here and be sure I have a nice end to it and dip it in my paint in my wet palette, and then I'm gonna sponge off quite a bit of it here on the wet palette. And then I'm gonna go over to my paper towel here. I'm gonna sponge off till most of it is off, something like that, so we don't overdo the paint and fill in those the deep recesses we don't want to fill in with paint. It is a good idea to maybe test. You can see where I tested before. This is just like a Mini that had gotten messed up a long time ago that I kind of prime each time and can kind of do some testing on. The important part about this is being pretty light on your hits here, but I'm just tapping the Mini, supporting the Mini with my other hand. And you'll notice it really slowly builds up the color until, yeah, you have a pretty nice finish there. Again, the finish on this isn't super good because this I just like primed quickly, wasn't trying to be careful. But yeah, if you have too much paint, it'll kind of glob in all the deep recesses, which we do not want at all, because on our actual models, they're, have black way down in the recesses. But yeah, not a bad idea to test, see if you're getting a smooth finish. If it is chalky, I would make sure your paint isn't old. I would make sure you put in enough medium and stirred it well enough, and that you have a nice finish from your initial prime as well, and that you're not using sponges with a bunch of holes in them. Make sure they're nice and smooth sponges. Can move on to one of my actual Minis here, one of the Commandos. Same process. Take quite a bit of this off. And start sponging. I'm aiming to cover most of the Mini with this paint. This is kind of our deepest, darkest color besides the black. You can kind of see the difference there. I know it's a little hard to tell just with it's an iPhone camera and my lighting. But yeah, I'm going to try to cover most of the model here, just not get into some of the really deep recesses, but most of it covered with this nice green here. And there we go. You can see after one layer, that's what it looks like. Not too bad. Here's another one that I did here. And again, yeah, I covered most of the Mini. You can see a couple parts that would naturally be in shadow, like under the backpack there, are still pretty black, which is perfectly fine, or kind of under the chest, which is covered by the gun and wouldn't see a lot of light anyway. Here's a before, just the solid prime, and then the first layer there. Now you may notice there's a couple sections you weren't able to get paint into, even though they probably should have paint in them. Like right behind his neck here, should have some green paint in it. It shouldn't be completely black down there because, naturally there would be sunlight up ahead and that might have a little shadow to it, but shouldn't be pure black. So what you can do is cut off like a little strip of this sponge, use a nice edge to it, a nice smooth edge. You can do the same thing, take off most of the paint there, a little more on your paper towel, and then I can try to get into that next base a little. This piece might even be a little too big, might need a slightly smaller one, or like there in the small of his back down there, I'm going to use this. You You can also just use, if it's thin enough, you can just use the opposite end of the brush, or sorry, of the sponge like this to get into those recesses. But again, yeah, you're looking for most of the model covered, while you're still keeping, you know, some of those parts like around the knee black, parts of the chest. You definitely will get green just because of the nature of this paint, how we're doing this paint job. Like, you will get some green on this, which is going to be black later, but that's super easy to fix later. We'll just use some contrast. Kind of hard to tell, but a little on that butt piece there, I'm starting to get a little bit of texture, and maybe right around there on the front of that thigh. Let's see if it focuses. There's a tiny bit of texture there. Again, not a huge deal, but that kind of tells me that, hey, maybe my either paint is starting to dry a little bit, so I'm going to stir it around a little. If you notice any kind of chunks in there, you'll want to, you know, get some fresh paint in there on a new section, or that it's drying too much on your sponge and leaving a texture. So I'm going to toss out these sponges. You can also just, if you don't mind the smaller work surface, you can also just cut this sponge to reveal a fresh face on it. I actually didn't do that in one fell swoop, so yeah, you want to be sure that you get one clean cut without stopping, so you get a nice fresh surface. It's probably be pretty hard to tell, but if you do get little like particles or specks on your mini, there's some right about there. It's really hard to tell. You can actually, if you don't wait too long, you can actually just kind of swipe like this with the brush kind of along the top there, and you can get those to come off. Just kind of drag them out with your sponge. The first layer, and I'm trying to get most of the model, you'll see that even I'm like turning it upside down to get some up there, like on the thighs, or I've already shown, but kind of at the base of the backpack there. Trying to get this green almost everywhere, because this is gonna kind of be almost our deepest, darkest layer, besides the black and a few recesses. But again, yeah, 90% of the model I'm covering as much as I can. For a few places like the chest right there, I'm going to use the tip of the sponge right there, so I can actually get in there and get some paint on the chest. You can already see some of the paint on my wet palette is dried quite a bit, so I'm going to replace this piece of paper. One also important part to not getting texture on your mini is to keep using fresh parts of the blue paper towel here. If I keep going in the same spot, then I'm going to be picking up debris and a bunch of dried paint from the previous times that I've been on this blue paper towel. Got the first layer done on all of them here. Really happy with how this looks. It's a really nice dark green. Okay, I'm on to my next color here, black green. Okay, now onto the application process. Same thing. Kind of load up the wedge here, get a lot of the paint off, and then over on a fresh towel here because it's a new color. Gonna take off most of it and then just work my way around the mini. Now what's different with this color is I'm not gonna hit as much as I did with the previous color. Some of the parts, like, you know, the chest, under the gun there, like under the backpack, maybe like the back of the legs, kind of deep in those shadow areas, I'm not really going to hit with this color because we want that dark German dark green here that we put on after our primer to still be there and to give us a nice contrast. And here's one done. Okay, we are on to our last color here, which is going to be flat green. You can kind of see, again, we were primed in black. We did this German camo dark green first. Then we stepped up to black green. That's the step we just did. And then lastly, this flat green, which is a decent bit brighter. It's going to be our highest coat we do. And then I will do a little dry brushing on the edges, but this is pretty much the greenest it's going to get. This part is really fun. One thing I really like about this sponge technique is if you don't have a lot of paint on it, you can really, as long as your colors are pretty close to each other, like these two, you can build up some really nice gradients, almost similar to what you can get with an airbrush. And you can do some feathering with it. So this is kind of our end result of what we're looking to get. Here is the mini from the previous step, and then I've already done this last step kind of ahead of time to kind of show you the result you can get out of it. But yeah, you can kind of notice on the leg there, I have some of this flat green, but I was really careful in some of these slightly lower areas to put it on really light and really slowly build up the color there. And it creates this really nice effect. And then on areas that are obviously, you know, would be directly in the light, like imagine the sun coming down from right above, like the back of this leg, I did pretty heavy on the last green color, the top of the backpack, the top of the head, side of the face there, the shoulder pole drawns. the top of the arm, this knee, a little bit onto the thigh. But yeah, so these raised areas were pretty much, decently heavy on the green. I tapped it quite a bit. And on these kind of intermediate areas that would be a little in the shadow, I just made sure I had very little paint on the sponge here, got a lot of it off, and then just really, really slowly and lightly built up the color there until I liked what it looked like. Okay, yeah, I've got my paint set here, my flat green, and actually added a little bit more, almost 50-50 now, with the medium to help thin it out even more on this last step. Got a lot of the paint off, I'm gonna dab a bunch off on this paper towel. I'm gonna start in the brightest spots, so like the top of the head here, and try to get a nice green slowly built up. Top of the helmet, the top and back of the backpack would have quite a bit of light, but approaching everything at kind of either a straight down angle or at like a 45-degree angle coming down like this, hitting the shoulder pauldrons or shoulder armor, whatever it is, and the arms some here. Doesn't matter if you get any on the gun. We're gonna get that with some black in a little bit. And then yeah, down here now there's not a lot of paint left on here, which is really nice. So yeah, so around this area, like this kind of knee pad and this leg, I'm gonna really, really lightly, it may take 20 or 30 taps, but as I'm tapping more and kind of moving my sponge around, you'll see it starting to deposit some green, some of this flat green on the foot. Got some on there, got kind of a brighter spot right there, and it looks really natural. I'm really impressed with how well this mode of painting works. And yeah, I'm gonna hit a little on the back of the leg here because this would have quite a bit of light hitting it. But again, don't want to go too heavy because we don't want to cover up all the other work we've done, getting these really nice gradients of color. Stirring this paint again, getting a new sponge pretty much on every single one. Done with the third one now. Yeah, you can kind of see here what I did. Same idea, some green down there on that leg, kind of left this upper thigh on the left leg darker. The top of the backpack, the back of the backpack, made sure each shoulder had quite a bit of green and that wrist there, and obviously the helmet. And on this side, pretty big area of exposed armor that would have quite a bit of light on it. So yeah, hit that thigh pretty hard, the knee, and then the chest there as well. Perfect, and just did the squad leader here. This one was pretty easy. I'd say the easiest so far because it has a lot of nice dark spots. So yeah, did this leg decently heavily, but this upper left thigh, not really much because there's a lot of shadow from this arm being up and under the armpit. On the back here, yeah, did this foot, a little bit of this light green, but most of this all under here is pretty shadowy and dark, so I didn't hit it with any. And then obviously I did the back of the backpack, the top of the backpack, kind of all areas of the helmet, 360 on the helmet, shoulders and arms. And on the chest here, hit about this area right here, and then feathered a tiny bit down into like the belly button area, but didn't really hit any on here just because that's a pretty dark area, especially when the mini is sitting like this on the table. And yeah, just want to highlight, I think one of my favorite parts about this method is that if you can see on the helmet there, let's see, yeah, you still have a nice dark, it's almost perfect how you still have the dark in the visor there. For these guys, that doesn't matter as much because, I'm going to paint it white inside and then hit it with blue. But especially for normal, phase 1 or phase 2s or stormtroopers, you can get that super easy. Like, doing that freehand would be so difficult, especially for me not being that skilled of a painter, to try to get my paintbrush in there and not hit my white. So that's kind of my favorite part about this technique is you get to preserve those tiny recesses and keep those areas dark and super easy. Like, this phase 2 helmet took me, minutes, if that, for this entire mini total, and you get these really crisp lines. Few more stages left. You could honestly just do one more stage if you really wanted to, and then call it done. I'm also going to do a cool visor here in a little bit, but first we're going to put Black Templar. You could use another black as well. I just like how the Black Templar goes on. It's really easy to apply. I'm going to apply that to a few areas we've gotten green that shouldn't necessarily be green. So like this clothing piece down there, the gloves obviously, and the gun. I may do a little like under the neck if the green is gone to some places I don't want. Just kind of browse your mini, look it over and see if the green is gone anywhere that you want to paint black with the Black Templar. Should just take a few minutes. Okay, now we're on to one of the more tedious bits, probably the only tedious bit of this entire paint job, is painting inside the visors. For standard clones, you know, we can just leave it black in there, which looks really good. But for the Commandos, you know, they have those light up visors. You could totally leave them like this. If you can see, you know, it still does look really good without a lit up visor, but I'm going to take it one step further and light up the visor. So for the masks, we're going to use some matte white. You can really use any white color you want. And also some water. This is probably the most tedious part of this painting process, is getting the white on this mask there. And we're coating it with white on the bottom so that this contrast blue will show up for the glowing face masks. If we just put it over the black that's already there, it's not going to show up at all. So we first need to put down a layer of white paint. Yeah, I put a little bit of white into here, just a couple drops, and then I added a decent bit of water, probably about 2 times the amount using this dropper of water, mixed it up really well, and that will allow the paint to flow. Now we're on to the visor color. Gonna use this contrast achromatic blue, and this stuff does flow super well. So yeah, it should just be able to load a little bit up on the tip of my brush here, and kind of just deposit the paint right at the top of the T there, right in the center, and then it should flow to those other areas. You know, like I've got a decent little glob of paint on the end of my brush there, and then when I tap it in the center, it'll almost make a little bubble, and then it'll slowly kind of flow to the other areas. But you can use a decent bit of it because when it dries, it'll kind of go down some as the water evaporates. Okay, on to one of our last steps here, second to last step, I believe. We're going to dry brush to really accentuate the highlights in the raised areas on the armor. You can see I did a little one with my test mini here. You see those tiny faint lines there that kind of show off the top of the visor. That is this Niblet green I used from Citadel. And yeah, this is kind of my brightest green. The last green we had used with our sponge technique on the Commandos was this flat green, and then you can tell this is just slightly lighter, which is great. You obviously can edge highlight these. I just prefer the speed of dry brushing. You can sometimes get a slightly chalky finish too, but as long as you use one of these blue paper towels to take off the excess paint, you work efficiently and don't go kind of crazy on it, you can get some still pretty good edge highlights using dry brushing. Now we don't want to dry brush all over this model. Like down here is not a place we want to dry brush. This wouldn't have those light highlights on them because it's in shadow, but mainly I'm going to concentrate on like areas of the face here, which will look really good. The shoulder, maybe the top of this knee here, because a lot of light would be hitting right around this area. This wrist, the top of the backpack, but really only areas that would either show up with light that comes straight down or at like a slight angle on the sides are what I'm going to hit with the dry brushing. Several different types of dry brushes. I'm going to use this one, the small dry brush from Citadel. Just gives me a lot of control because it's really pretty small relatively. They have shorter and stiffer bristles than standard paintbrushes. This small dry brush from Army Painter is also really good. But yeah, nice stiff bristles. And yeah, to dry brush, you can load up a little bit of paint. This paint is not liquidy at all. It's just kind of solid. You get a little paint on tip of your brush here. can see some. And then I'm going to get a lot of it off on this paper towel. You can also use some kind of textured surface. I turned this little work cut mat upside down. It's got these little ridges on it, so you can use your brush on this to kind of take off if there's too much green. You really don't want a lot of green on this before you dry brush, or else it's going to kind of smear and get on places we don't want it, because we just want it on those edges. So yeah, I'm going to use this, and you see a little bit of paint is coming off there, and I'm going to do this. You always want to err on the side of caution, so I'm going to do this till I really don't hardly see any paint coming off, and then I'm going to try to start with this edge here, just very lightly. I'm swiping, I'll get you a little better view there. There we go. I'm swiping on here, and you'll notice it's very, very slowly but surely making that edge slightly lighter. I'll try it up on a shoulder here as well. Hopefully you can see a little better. This is a pretty faint difference, but as you go, as you see, as I do more and more and more, that edge starts to show up more, and it gives us a lot more definition to our miniature. Do these wrists here as well. Gonna work a little more down here on the knee armor, and then up on the top of the thigh, that seam there. And I'm very lightly brushing this because I don't want it to smear on the other parts. I mainly just want to deposit paint on that seam. Now, depending how clean you were doing the masks, there's a couple parts on the mask here. It's pretty faint, but where the blue, is kind of bled a little onto the green there. Now that it's dried, I can kind of see it. So I just mixed a little of our last color that we did, not the dry brush color, but the last one we sponged on, this flat green. Mixed it up here, didn't bother using the wet palette for now, and put quite a bit of medium in it, so it's nice and thin, about 50-50 or so. And then I'm just using a really fine pointed brush here to just fill in some of those blue sections. Okay, we are almost finished here. Really like how these guys have turned out so far. Kind of one final step I'm gonna do is putting some Necron compound on the gun. This is, kind of this silver-ish, and it looks like, kind of gives the effect of a worn metal, kind of like metal that's been maybe scraped off or used some, and I'm going to use it on just the black guns here to kind of make them look a little more realistic. I should point out that you shouldn't reuse the same dry brush, obviously, because it's going to get, green on the gun, but I also don't want to wash this dry brush I just used and then immediately use it on the gun with the Necron compound, because the bristles will still be wet and they take a little while to dry. And if you have wet bristles in the dry paint, it will make it smear instead of going on the raised edges. So I'm gonna get a fresh dry brush here, one that I know is dry and clean for this step. And yeah, pretty simple. You just kind of dab the brush a little bit in there, get some silver. You can use either the mat here to get rid of a lot of it, or a paper towel. These kind of textured surfaces can be nice though. To help take off any excess. And then just on the top of the gun, kind of on the raised edges, I'm just very lightly going to brush it, and you'll see it'll deposit this silver color on the edges of the gun. Due to the nature of dry brushing being kind of dusty sometimes, I also, as a final step, just use some compressed air here to help blow off some of that dust off the minis. Could also possibly use just one of the sponges from before and try to wipe some off, but I find compressed air works pretty well. And that is them done. Also at this stage, if you wanted to add some, kind of accent colors like I did on my phase 2s, if you want something like that, perfectly fine. I really like this kind of just deep green, pure deep green color, so I'm going to keep them that way. But yeah, really like how these turned out. I think they're going to look really cool, especially on a Kashyyyk or forest-themed, you know, Endor map. Here's a final shot of all 4 of them. I'd be super grateful if you would subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram at the Legion Bros. If you have any questions about how I painted these minis, feel free to ask in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for what you'd like me to paint next, let me know as well. I've painted a lot of units from Legion, but I have several that I haven't, and also some unopened stuff as well. Thanks for watching.